I get a bit intimidated by those types of people that are really good with numbers and like big amounts of money. They think in categories that I don't think in. About 20 years ago, Jamie and I started using an envelope system. And when I say that, I mean literally like envelopes. Grocery and date night, so that if we went to buy groceries, we paid with cash right out of that envelope. And that lasted for about 4 years. And then we went to an online version of envelopes, and we still use that today. It is simple, which makes it absolutely perfect for me. I don't know how you feel about your money management abilities, but I would make you a promise this morning out of this passage. And it's the promise that this passage and the truth it contains is all you need to be smarter than the absolute most brilliant money manager out there today who doesn't know Christ. So if you have a Bible, turn with me to Luke chapter 16. Luke chapter 16, and we're going to look at verses 1 through 13. And I'll read this to begin here. Luke 16. He also said to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges. Let me start that all over again. It seems so biblical to say manger when you're in the Gospel of Luke, coming off of Christmas. Okay. He also said to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. And he called him and said to him, what is it that I hear about you? Turn in your account of your management, for you can no longer be my manager. And the manager said to himself, what shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do, so that when I am removed from management, people may receive me into their houses. So, summoning his master's debtors, one by one, he said to the first, how much do you owe my master? He said, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, and how much do you owe? He said, 100 measures of wheat. He said to him, take your bill and write 80. The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. One who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. The one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. Now, this is a tough passage. This is a passage that people have debated for centuries. There are 3 or 4 different interpretive options. And what makes the passage difficult is that just upon a simple reading of the passage, it almost sounds as if Jesus is praising this money manager for being dishonest. So let's actually just look carefully at the details of this parable, and we'll talk about what Jesus is saying by giving this parable. So there is a rich man. He has a money manager. This was not uncommon then. It's not uncommon today. People who find themselves with a lot of money sometimes hire people who really know how to manage money. It doesn't always equate that somebody who has money really understands how to maximize it. You can inherit money, You can have a particular skill that gains you wealth, but it doesn't mean that you necessarily understand the markets and how to work with people and maximize your money. That's what this man is doing for the rich man. He's good with money, with maximizing money. But then the rich man finds out that his money manager has been doing dishonest things. So he calls him in and he cans him, says, "You're fired." And so the money manager finds himself in a new position. Money's always come through for him. No doubt, working for this rich man, he was not only making money work for him, money was working for himself too. But now he's in a situation, he's out of a job. Money's not going to come through for him here really quickly. And he thinks to himself, "I'm too old, I can't go out and do manual labor, I can't dig." He's way too proud, self-respecting, to go out and start begging. And so he does something smart, albeit dishonest, albeit selfish, but he does something smart using his money management skills. He actually thinks about money and how he can use money to secure a future for him now that he doesn't have a job. And what he does is he goes out and he starts calling together these people who are in debt to his former boss. And he says to the first one, he says, "Okay, what do you owe? What do you owe him?" And he says, "Well, I owe 100 measures of oil." And he says, "Okay, I want you to," he says, "quickly, there's an urgency here. I want you to slash that and write 50. And he calls another guy and he says, "What do you owe?" And he says, "Well, I owe 100 measures of wheat." And he goes, "Okay, you write 80. Make it 80. And then right away in the parable, it just clips right away into the parable. In verse 8, it says, "The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness." So again, just that kind of appreciates the difficulty of the passage. What is Jesus calling praiseworthy here? Like, what is Jesus praising about this money manager who just went out and dishonestly and purely selfishly used his master's money to secure his future? Well, the first thing we know, just because we know Jesus, we've been studying Jesus, we know that he's not actually praising his dishonesty. There's no way that he's actually praising this money manager's deceit and his dishonesty. There's no way he's praising his selfishness. What is often, it's important when we study a parable like this, it's oftentimes really important that we realize there are so many details and layers to the story. That's how stories have to get told. There are so many details that if we were to focus on these details and try to find principles in all of them, we would find ourselves way off in the woods. Oftentimes with a parable like this, there is one razor-sharp point or truth that Jesus is making, and that is absolutely the case with this parable. What Jesus is praising this money manager for is that he actually used money as a tool to secure his future by making friends. He's praising this money manager for seeing money as merely an opportunity to build relationships with other people. So that when he's kicked out, when he's out there on the street, he's got alliances that will say, "You know what? I feel something for you. You come in. I can't let you just be out there and starve." He's using money to secure his future by building friendships. Now, the reason we know this is the point of the parable is because it's exactly what Jesus rolls on into in verse 9 and tells the disciples to do with it. Look at verse 9 again. Jesus says, "And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings." To understand what Jesus is saying here about money and how to use money and and what he's praising this money manager for, we need to think for just a moment together about how Jesus views money. And again, some of this is speculation. Much of it is not. We've been in the Gospel of Luke for over a year, and we've handled numerous passages where Jesus is talking about money. I would say our instincts on how Jesus thinks about money or feels about money are fairly accurate. The best I can tell when it comes to money, in Jesus' thinking, it is neither here nor there. It is not worth living for. It is not worth dying for. Money is merely a tool. It's a resource. I'll give you a parallel for that. I just grabbed one. Money is a lot like, we'll say, like a chef's knife. One of my favorite Christmas presents this year was a chef's knife that my mom bought me. It's made in Japan, and it is incredibly sharp. I'm having to bring my A game every time I use it so I don't slice off a finger. But a chef's knife, right? Right now as we're here, I was going to bring it and set it out here, and I'm like, I'm not bringing it. I'll drop it in the parking lot. Right now it's sitting at home in this bamboo rack. And as it sits there and we're all here, that thing it's pretty worthless. It's not doing anything. Now, if a chef's knife ends up in the wrong hands, in the hands of somebody who has selfish intent, maybe the intent to harm other people, it's a very dangerous thing. It becomes immediately, inherently dangerous in that person's hands. But in the hands of somebody that really knows how to use it, somebody better than me at using it, then that tool, that knife becomes an incredible possibility of countless amazing meals with friends, like building friendships and celebrating family. And I would suggest there's a sense in which Jesus views money in a very similar way. It's just a thing, but it's also a tool. It's a world of possibilities and opportunities. Now, there is a slight difference between how I think Jesus would view and speak about money versus like a chef's knife. And that is that it shows up in verse 9. Jesus uses a very strong label when he talks about money or wealth. Look at verse 9 again. He says, "And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth." That word unrighteous literally means false or untrustworthy. That's what this word actually means, is it's untrustworthy money. It's false wealth. And best I can tell, Jesus is calling wealth and money untrustworthy. He's calling it unrighteous, specifically because what the fallen human heart does with money. We do something with money that we don't do with like a chef's knife or like a hammer or some other tool. We don't ask a chef's knife to actually be God for us. But we do ask money to be God for us. Now, I'm not suggesting that any one of us goes home and pulls out our wallet and pulls out a $100 bill and talks to it and says, "Hey, would you be God for me?" I'm not suggesting that we do that. But I think if we're honest and we think about our wealth, we think about what's in our savings account, what's in our investment account, or our children's college accounts. When we think about what would be our wealth, our resources, we oftentimes in our minds, unspoken and possibly even subconsciously, we say to that wealth, "You can secure a future for me, right? Like you can actually help me accomplish my dreams, right? You can actually help me get the type of community that like surround me with relationships and friendships and people, right? Like you can make me feel alive and satisfied and happy, right?" I think if we're honest, we really do think in those categories about money and income and wealth and savings. And in essence, what we're saying to our wealth is, you can be God for me, right? Because all those things, they're all needs. I feel those things just like you feel those things. They're all very legitimate needs. They're all very legitimate needs that pre-existed the fall. God created us as people to need a future, to need hope, to need a sense of security, to need relationships. That's just who we are. But He created us to only find those things in Him. And there's something about money. Jesus singles money out of all the stuff in the world, the just stuff things in the world, like a piece of paper with an amount written on it. He singles money out as the single greatest competitor to God when it comes to our worship, our devotion, our motivation. And that's why He calls it unrighteous wealth. I can't think of a time in the Scriptures that He calls it righteous. There's a way that money connects with us that we put our hopes in it, but it's false. It's untrustworthy. It will never come through. But the point of this parable is that money itself, it isn't anything. It isn't anything, except it's a possibility. It's an opportunity. That $1 bill in your pocket right now, or that $1,000 in your checking account, or maybe that $10,000 sitting in your investment account, that is a possibility. It is a world of opportunities. Possibilities and opportunities for what? Well, I'm really glad you asked me that question. Possibilities and opportunities to make friends. Now, before you just think, well, that's a silly thing for him to say, that is exactly what Jesus is saying in this passage. In verse 9, he says to his disciples, your money, your resources, this stuff that the world falsely hopes in, it is so good for you to see that as an opportunity to make friends. And potentially friends with people that one day when you cross from this world into the next, they're going to be there waiting for you. Look at verse 9 again. It says, and I tell you, make friends for yourself by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, these friends, may receive you into the eternal dwellings. Make friends. This just struck me as really interesting. We've looked at a lot of passages on money in Luke, and they come from different angles and kind of hit us in all different places, right? But this one's kind of different. This one's interesting. Jesus is talking about money in terms of an opportunity for us to use our money in a way that makes friends. What friends, though? Like, what friends does Jesus have in mind for us to make using our resources? Well, I really wrestled with how to answer that question until I went back and I actually looked at a passage that we've already studied together. And this passage, to me, answers the question, what type of friends or what friends is Jesus talking about? Turn back a couple chapters, a few chapters, to Luke chapter 12. Luke chapter 12. When you get to Luke 12, go down and look at verses 33 and 34. I'll read it. Jesus says, sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Now, what struck me about this passage is how similar it is to our passage in Luke 16. It's similar in a lot of ways. First of all, it's talking about the exact same subject. It's talking about money, and it's talking about generosity. But it even uses some of the same language, like it says in Luke 12 here, with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail. We remember we just read up in chapter 16, he's talking about money and wealth, and he says, when it fails, you'll still have these friends who will welcome you in. So he's using the same language on the same subject. But I also, when I'm trying to answer one question from a different passage, I'm looking at all these different layers. Another thing important to see here is that in both passages, he's talking to the disciples. As we've been going through Luke, there's times when Jesus is talking to the disciples, there's times when he's talking to the scribes and the Pharisees, and the tone and the nature of these different passages are very, very different. Now, we know a lot of the disciples won't always follow Jesus. Many of them will desert Jesus the closer he gets to Jerusalem and his exodus. But we're to see in this moment when he's talking to the disciples that these are the committed ones. These are the ones who have said, we're not going to oppose you, we're going to listen. We think you have the teaching that is from God. And so there's a way that these two passages connect just because it's the same audience. But when we take our question of who are the friends that we're to be making with our resources and with our wealth right now, when we take that and let chapter 12 answer it, it's the needy. Sell your possessions and give to the needy. Now, that word needy, the word actually doesn't show up in the original. It's not like a closed category. It's a very, very broad idea. It's basically the idea of anybody that you can be kind to. Anybody who you have something that would meet a need for them. Clearly in Luke's gospel, he keeps coming back to the poor, to the outcasts in society. He comes back to the women in this culture, to the sojourners, to the handicap or the cripple. He comes back to those who are spiritually oppressed. But it's anybody in need. It's the young couple who just gave birth, or it's the young couple who just had a miscarriage, or it's the family that's laid up with COVID right now and can't grocery shop and could really use a meal. Or, I mean, it's such a broad category. It's anybody that has a need that you can use your resources and you can just go meet that need. And it's so broad, I think we'd all agree that it's at times in life, it's every single one of us. Like we move into this category of being needy and then less needy. But it's the needy. That's, Jesus is saying, use your wealth now, use your resources now to meet the needs of others and make friends with those people who you have things that would benefit them. Use your wealth to make friends. What does that mean? Or how does wealth make friends? I don't want to claim to have a perfect answer on that or a full answer on that. When I wrote that question down this morning, actually, something popped into my mind. It's not even on the paper here. I'll just give you an example. This is the example that came to my mind of how money is just a thing, but it becomes an opportunity for connecting friends and creating warmth in a relationship. This was years ago. This was, I want to say like 1995. And Jamie and I were still dating. And I had been, kind of wrestling with, do I want to, I'm going to give you guys much more than you probably want. I was working on a degree in forestry, fisheries, and wildlife. And I was thinking I want to work with aquaculture, like trout, right? But I was also starting to get involved in the church. And I was falling in love with the church. And I was wrestling with what to do here, and I finally kind of started feeling like, I feel like I should lean toward the church. And I was being discipled by a pastor, and I was getting excited about that idea. So I started telling a few of my closest friends and my family members. And I remember being at Jamie's rental, and her 3 roommates were there, and one of them had a boyfriend. She's now married too. And his name's Paul. And I didn't know Paul very well. I actually still don't know Paul all that well. But I remember telling them and feeling nervous about people's responses, and I remember they were excited. But I remember Paul walked me out to my truck, and we get to my truck, and he pulls out his wallet, and he says, "Man, it's all I got." He had a 50 in his wallet, but he said, "It's all I got, but I want to be one of the first to give to this. I love what you're doing. I want to be in your corner." And $50. I ended up marrying Jamie, and then together we went to seminary about a year and a half later. And when I look at the cost of seminary, $50 feels pretty small. But I'm telling you, when I think back on the year of 1995, I just don't have a great memory, and I hardly have any memories of 1995. But for some reason, in 2021, when I'm sitting here thinking about, hey, what's an example of how money created warmth between me and a friend, I remember that moment when Paul emptied his wallet, gave it to me, and said, "I'm in your corner." And I still, obviously, to this day, remember it. I think about Paul as, a brother. And I realize that's just such a tiny little narrow example. But what is clear is that our resources, absolutely, they're tools, they're potential for building warmth and relationship and a real tenderness between brothers and sisters. And Jesus is saying, use it that way. Use your wealth to make friends. Now, again, it's an interesting direction to come at money. And it's not something we talk about very much as the church, that we should use our resources to make money, or we use our resources to make friends. This is the awesome and mysterious part of this text, but it's right here in this passage that some of the people that we help, some of the people that we give to, and guys, it might be a person in a parking lot that we saw on the way in to Subway, and on the way out from Subway, we just stop and say, "Hey, obviously I can't talk long, but I bought you a sub." Some of the people that we give to are going to be people that, because of their faith in Christ, they beat us into heaven. And these people, because of the way we used our resources to make that connection and form that friendship, will be in a welcoming squad, waiting for you and celebrating you when you leave this earth and enter into glory. And again, that may seem like a silly thing for me to say, but that is exactly what Jesus is saying in this passage. Is it mysterious? Yeah, absolutely. Is it true? It is absolutely true. This is not a metaphor. How we use our resources right now will change the people we know and the warmth that we will have with these people the moment we cross into glory. What's the wisdom then that makes us smarter than the smartest financial counselor or investment banker in the world who doesn't know Christ? It's just this. We are living right now with our resources. We are managing our money right now for the moment we cross into glory. Not for the moments between now and when we die. This is what I believe Jesus is saying in verse 8. We kind of skipped over the last part of verse 8, which is an interesting statement. Look at what Jesus says. It says, the master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. And then he says this, for the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. I wrestled with that. Tried to understand the tone of that. Like, what is Jesus saying here? Is it a critical statement about Christians, about the sons of light, the disciples? What is Jesus saying? But when we place it in its context and we think about it in light of all that we've talked about so far, what it seems to me like Jesus is saying is he's saying, listen, the sons of this generation, the people in this world who don't know me, maybe don't know me yet, but those who don't know me are thinking very deeply about their money. And they're thinking very deeply about their money entirely for this category of where they're at right now until the moment they die. That's what matters. That's life. And we see this today. I mean, you can study this. You can become brilliant in how to manage your money, invest your money, build the right retirement account, so that between now and when you die, you have managed that money and maximized that money as much as possible. Jesus is saying here in verse 8, those who don't know me, they're really good at this. Like, it matters a lot. They have really educated themselves, and they're doing a much better job than the sons of light. Because the sons of light have a different target they're aiming at. It's okay, let them be better. Because the sons of light, we're not living for, Christians are not living for now until when we die, how do I maximize my money so that my retirement looks exactly the way I want it to? And money works for me in all these ways between now and when I die. We're not aiming at that target as Christians. We're aiming at the target of, how do I be generous now? How do I sacrifice now? How do I make friends now so that when I cross into glory, there is a huge welcoming party, a huge diverse group of people that are like, Zeke, you're finally here. He's not scolding Christians. He's saying, money managers like the one he just talked about here, let them be really good at this. We have different goals. We have different targets. We're going to go about our goals honestly. We're not going to cheat anybody. He's not praising any of those aspects about this money manager in the parable. But he is saying through this parable, there's a way to learn from this money manager. There's a way to look at those in this world who are maximizing money to secure the future they want. In part by making friends, learn from them. Because money to the Christian is not inconsequential. Money to the Christian is an incredible responsibility. It's an incredible opportunity. Take it seriously. Maximize it. Make friends. For the moment you pass into glory. This is why, by the way, I just feel like we need to be careful as Christians to really weigh carefully the financial advice we take or that we buy into. Because if it's financial advice that's coming from somebody who has the target of maximizing life from now until death, it's going to look very different from the one who says, you know what, in faithfulness to Christ, I'm living for this instant after death. I don't know what that looks like. I just know there's got to be a caution we take into any weighing of financial advice and wisdom. We just have a different target we're aiming at. I tried to think this week, we've looked at so many of these passages about money. I tried to think this week, what is it that we can look at these passages and we can still struggle so much with being radically generous, like hilariously, sacrificially giving with our resources, with our money. And it struck me, I'm thinking about that question, and I'm like, that's the answer. We see it as our money. We see it as our wealth. But there's actually a statement in this passage we just read, and we're going to come back to this a little bit next week, but verse 12 tells us the opposite is actually true. Look at verse 12. It says, "And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own?" Our money, the money that may enter our hands, the wealth that may come to sit in our accounts for a season, it is not ours. None of it is ours. All of it belongs to God. Now, I know that we struggle with that. I know we struggle with that. And I think a part of our struggle with that statement is we really do like to think of ourselves as self-made men and women. We really do. We like to be able to look at what we have that maybe other people don't have, and we like to think, this is a result of me working a little bit harder than other people, maybe being a little bit smarter than other people. It's a part of the work ethic that I carry that others don't carry. But the reality of our situation, the clearest biblical truth about our situation is that every single thing in our lives, including our money, every single thing in our lives has been given to us as a gift from God. Everything is a gift. And again, I can anticipate, I can hear some people saying, wait a second. In theory, I guess that's probably true, but I went to school for 16 years to get this degree so I could get this job. Or I could hear somebody saying, I do work harder than people. I get up at 5:30. I work straight through the day. I don't take an hour lunch. I get home about 7 o'clock every night. You can't tell me this isn't my money. That is a really dangerous, faulty, untrue way of thinking. The very nature of creation, and I mean creation going back to creation in Genesis, but I mean even your creation and my creation. The very nature of creation is grace. One person puts it this way, describes the very nature of creation as its givenness. There's a givenness to creation. Everything about creation, yours and mine, it's all a gift. It's all grace. The very fact that you and I are here today, rather than not being here or not existing at all, the very fact that you and I have minds, that we have brains that can learn, that can go to school for 16 years, that we have bodies that can get out of bed at 5:30 in the morning and work all day with very little break until 7 o'clock at night. The fact that we have hands that can grip a piece of chalk and teach math or tie sutures or conduct orchestras or pick up a Bible and preach. The very fact that anything happens, that we experience anything or that we exist, that one more heartbeat, that one more breath, that when we get sick, we get healthy, every single thing about us, including what we earn, everything about us is a gift. It's all by the grace of God. Not to mention all the factors and all the details about our lives that we literally had nothing to do with. The fact that you and I are alive right now, and many of us were born in this country, a country with incredible freedoms, with incredible opportunities, a country that values education, a country that formed itself in order to be able to open doors for people, to have potential, to go out and pursue happiness. And we weren't born at a different time in the poorest country in the world to the poorest family of the world, and we had nothing to do with any of those things. Everything about our situation it was all decided and given to us by God as a gift. A biblical view of our lives, even what we earn, even what we have sitting in accounts that we manage, is that it's all grace. This is why it's very simple to be able to look at our struggle with giving and say, quite simply, it all boils down to pride. When I struggle with giving, when I struggle with being generous, when I struggle with seeing everything as belonging to the Lord and being able to come in and out freely, and I just get to enjoy it, if I'm honest with you, it all gets back to the idea that in some way I'm thinking, this is mine. It's not. None of it. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. I'm largely preaching to the choir. One of the things that I most love about this community, I've been here over 15 years, and one of the things that I'll talk with family members in Lincoln, some don't believe in God, or friends from my past, and they'll hear me talk about this church, and they'll ask, what do you love about that community so much? And how do you capture that, in a single discussion? But I'll say, man, I wish you knew these people. I wish you could see their hearts. I wish you could see how generous they are. Many of them are. And this last year, if I could speak frankly, this last year is great evidence of that. I said first hour, we haven't passed an offering plate. I can't even remember if we have plates or bags. It's been that long since we've passed anything before this congregation and said, here, please give. I think it's been March. And yet, we haven't. I probably do a poor job as a pastor. I probably really am dropping a ball in this area. I never push for you to give money. And yet, many in this community, out of love for Jesus, gave to a place where I'm not the numbers guy in our church. JJ would have to tell you, but I think we ended pretty near budget. I'm pretty sure we ended ahead of spending. And there's no boasting in that. If there's boasting, it's this community, you, my brothers and sisters, many of you are just overwhelmingly kind and generous with your resources. It's been that way for 15 years. But in an honest moment, there's probably a few of you that would need to say, that's not me that he's talking about right now. I hardly give anything. And maybe in that honest moment, you'd have to say, I've put a lot of effort into looking like a good Christian on the outside, but in the heart, if our view of money and how we handle it and how we give it and is a reflection of the heart, I am not walking with Jesus. And I honestly have no person or family in my mind when I say that. And I say that because if that's where you're at, I would just urge you to turn from it and be generous. And I can promise you, it's not because I'm anxious about the budget. I said this first hour when many of my colleagues were in here, I'm like, ask my colleagues. I never talk about it. I haven't been anxious about the budget in 15 years. Honestly, I don't think in those categories. I don't ever worry about it. I'm not urging you to be generous because of wanting to see a budget get met. I'm urging you to be generous because I love you, and I want you, when you leave this world, in that instant you reach glory, I want you to have a huge crowd of people that are saying, finally, you're here. I don't know, I found such peace and joy in this passage, in this idea that the one who truly owns it all, for each of us, he owns a cattle on 1,000 hills, right? Those are not cattle that are unowned. He literally owns everything. He owns the cattle that are owned by other people. The one who owns it all in this passage is actually telling us, spend it. Give it. Be hilarious in that. Make friends with it. Use what is mine to care for people and change your experience in some mysterious way of eternity, and especially of that moment you get to eternity. Use my resources, God is saying, to make friends for yourself, that are going to celebrate when you come home. So that when you leave this world and you hit the streets of eternity, you're going to have so many invites into people's homes. They're going to want to bring you into their eternal dwellings. The one who owns it all is encouraging us to do that. Let's pray. Father, thank you for passages like this that are so clear and they're so direct. And we are hard-headed people, and we need this type of hard-hitting, clear challenge from you to live for eternity. And we'd just ask for that for each one of us. Father, just help us, whatever our front line is, help us to think about our resources, think about our lives in terms of managing them well for that moment that we cross over and enter into glory with you. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.